The pressure is always there, not the crushing physical pressure of Neptune's atmosphere, though that's a constant threat, held back by layers of reinforced plasteel and a complex network of energy fields. No, this is a different kind of pressure, the weight of isolation, of distance, of knowing you're further from home than any human has ever been, save for the other 4 poor souls trapped with me on this oversized tin can. They call this station Titan's Gate, a name that's far too grandiose for what it is. A glorified mining platform, clinging to the edge of the solar system, like a barnacle on a very, very big whale. My name is Milo Carter, and I'm the chief engineer of this floating industrial complex. It's my job to keep this place running, to make sure the lights stay on, the air stays breathable, and the gravity generators keep our boots firmly planted on the deck, even if it is at that irritating 0.9 G that makes you feel permanently sluggish. We're here for the helium-3 primarily, a rare isotope abundant in Neptune's atmosphere. Back on Earth, it's the fuel of choice for the fusion reactors that power the megacities. It's valuable stuff, which is why we're out here, risking our necks and our sanity to suck it out of a gas giant that could swallow our entire planet whole without a burp. The work is monotonous, punctuated by moments of sheer terror when something goes wrong, which on a station like this, orbiting a planet like Neptune, happens more often than anyone back at Mission Control would like to admit. We run a skeleton crew, just 5 of us, each with our own areas of expertise, our own burdens to bear. There's Captain Bauer, a man who seems to have been born in a command chair. He's got that quiet authority, that air of calm competence that you want in a leader when you're millions of kilometers from the nearest help. He's seen it all, done it all, and probably lost a few good men along the way. He doesn't talk much about his past, but you can see it in his eyes, the weight of experience, the ghost of every crisis weathered. He's nearing the end of his final tour, and I know he's counting down the days until he can retire to that little farm he owns in New Zealand. Then there's Dr. Baker, our resident physician and shrink. He's a quiet, thoughtful man, more comfortable with medical charts and psychological profiles than with people. He patches us up when we're injured, dispenses meds for everything from space sickness to insomnia, and tries, in his own understated way, to keep us from going completely stir-crazy. He's got this calming presence, like a human tranquilizer, which is probably why he was chosen for this mission. Out here, mental health is just as important as physical health. Maybe more so. Sullivan is our pilot, young, cocky, and full of nervous energy. He's responsible for maneuvering the drones, those ungainly, spider-like machines that dip down into Neptune's atmosphere to collect the precious helium-3. He's good at his job, maybe a little too good. He takes risks that make the rest of us sweat, pushing the drones to their limits, always chasing that next big haul. He's got something to prove, I think, though I'm not sure to whom. And then there's Harding, my second in command and the closest thing I have to a friend on this station. He's a veteran engineer, a bear of a man with a surprisingly gentle touch when it comes to machinery. We've spent countless hours together, crawling through service tunnels, patching leaks, and coaxing ancient equipment back to life. He's the one I trust most on this crew, the one I can rely on when things get rough. We share a dark sense of humor, a necessary coping mechanism in this pressure cooker environment. He's got a family back on Earth, a wife and 2 kids he hasn't seen in 3 years. He keeps their pictures on his console, a constant reminder of what he's working for. Me? I'm here because I messed up. Royally. It was a long time ago, back on Earth, when I was part of a team developing an experimental FTL propulsion system. We were young, ambitious, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. We thought we were invincible. We were wrong. There was an accident, a catastrophic failure. Ben, my best friend, the lead scientist on the project, didn't make it out. The investigation cleared me of any technical wrongdoing, but that didn't change the fact that I was the one who gave the final go-ahead. I was the one who pushed the system too far, too fast. The guilt, it's a heavy thing to carry. It followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of my failure. I couldn't face Ben's family, couldn't stand the pitying looks from my colleagues. So I ran. I applied for the Neptune mission, a one-way ticket to the edge of nowhere. I told myself it was about redemption, about using my skills to contribute to something meaningful. But deep down, I knew it was about escape. Out here, there's no one to judge me, no one to remind me of what I did. There's just the work, the station, and the vast, indifferent expanse of space. And then there's the chronostasis module. It's the reason I was selected for this mission, despite my checkered past. The company thinks my experience with experimental, high-risk technology makes me uniquely qualified to oversee its operation. The module is supposed to be our safety net, our get-out-of-jail-free card. It's based on some pretty far-out quantum entanglement theories. The idea that you can link particles across vast distances, across time itself. In an emergency, it's supposed to allow us to shift our consciousnesses back a few crucial moments, giving us a chance to correct our mistakes, to prevent a disaster before it happens. It's not time travel, not really. It's more like a localized rewind, a temporary manipulation of our perception of time. At least that's what the scientists who designed it claim. They say it's perfectly safe, that they've run countless simulations, that there's no risk of paradoxes or side effects. But I've seen enough experimental technology go wrong to be skeptical. Tampering with the fundamental forces of the universe, it feels like playing God. And if my past has taught me anything, it's that humans make lousy gods. The module is still experimental. It's only been used a handful of times in controlled tests and never in a real emergency. It's a last resort, a desperate measure. And if I'm being honest, it makes me nervous. Every time I look at that inert, bulky machine sitting in its dedicated chamber, I get a knot in my stomach. It's a reminder that even out here, on the edge of the solar system, we're still dancing on the edge of the unknown, still pushing the boundaries of what we understand. And sometimes, when you push too hard, things break. People break. And the vast, indifferent universe, it doesn't care. It just keeps on expanding, leaving us to pick up the pieces. That's what I used to think, anyway, back when my biggest concern was calibrating the atmospheric processors or running diagnostics on the helium-3 extraction drones. I had the luxury of contemplating the universe's indifference from the relative safety of Titan's Gate. But that was before the universe decided to give me a more personal demonstration of its uncaring nature. Before it decided to show me just how easily things and people can break. Now, as I drifted off to another restless sleep cycle, fueled by lukewarm, recycled coffee and a gnawing unease about the upcoming chronostasis test, I would have given anything to go back to those simpler days, to that naive sense of security I once held. Little did I know that my world, our world, was about to shatter in a way I could never have imagined. The klaxon ripped me from a restless sleep, its jarring sound echoing through the station's metal bones. My stomach clenched, a familiar knot of dread tightening with each shriek of the alarm. Hull breach detected, Section C4. All personnel report to emergency stations. The station AI announced, its usually calm, modulated voice edged with a digital urgency that mirrored the frantic beat of my heart. I scrambled out of bed, my feet hitting the floor with a thud. I pulled on my uniform, my hands shaking slightly as I fumbled with the clasps. Section C4. That was where the primary atmospheric processors were located. The machines that kept us breathing, that held back the crushing, toxic environment of Neptune. A breach there was a catastrophe. Harding's grim face appeared on my cabin's comm screen. "Milo, get to the engineering bay. We have a situation." No pleasantries, no wasted words, just the stark reality of the crisis at hand. I grabbed my toolkit and sprinted through the corridors of Titan's Gate. Crew members rushed past me, their hurried footsteps and clipped exchanges painting a picture of controlled chaos. My mind raced, trying to anticipate the problem, to run through the emergency protocols in my head. but nothing could have prepared me for the scene that awaited me in the engineering bay. Sparks showered from malfunctioning consoles, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning insulation. Captain Bauer was barking orders, while Sullivan wrestled with the controls of a damaged diagnostic panel. Harding was rerouting power conduits, his movements precise and efficient despite the urgency of the situation. "The primary processor in C4 is offline," Harding reported. "We've sealed the section, but the backup is barely holding. We're losing atmosphere fast." I pushed my way to a console and pulled up the schematics of Section C4. The damage was extensive. A large section of the hull had been compromised, ripped open as if by some colossal force. It wasn't a simple puncture, it was a catastrophic rupture. "What happened?" I asked. "We don't know," Bauer replied, his gaze fixed on the main monitor, which displayed a chaotic jumble of sensor readings. One minute everything was fine, the next... This... The station lurched violently, throwing me off balance. Warning lights flashed across the console, and the AI's voice, now laced with a distinct digital tremor, announced, "Structural integrity compromised. Multiple system failures." We were running out of time. The backup processor wouldn't last long, and once it failed, we'd be exposed to the full fury of Neptune's atmosphere. Death would be swift, but not painless. "We need to buy ourselves some time," I said, thoughts darting through my head. "Harding, can you divert power from the non-essential systems to the backup processor?" "I can try," he replied, "but it won't be enough. We need to address the breach itself." That's when Captain Bauer made the call. "Activate the chronostasis module." My blood ran cold. The module. The experimental device that was supposed to be our last resort. The one piece of technology on this station that I truly feared. "Captain, are you sure?" "It's never been tested under these conditions." "We're out of options, engineer," Bauer said, his voice firm, brooking no argument. I wanted to protest, to argue that the risks outweighed the potential benefits, but I knew he was right. We were dead men if we did nothing. With a heavy heart, I initiated the pre-activation sequence for the chronostasis module. The other crew members, alerted by Bauer's order, began to converge on the module's chamber. Dr. Baker, his medical kit clutched in his hand, gave me a worried look. Even Sullivan, his usual cockiness gone, seemed subdued, his eyes wide with apprehension. We entered the room, a space dominated by the bulky, cylindrical form of the chronostasis module. We took our positions around the module, each of us facing a neural interface headset, the device that would link our consciousnesses to the machine. "Initiating chronostasis sequence," I announced. I pressed the activation button, and the module sprang to life. The room was filled with a low-frequency vibration. I felt a pulling sensation, a disorientation that went beyond anything I had ever experienced. Then, everything went wrong. Instead of the smooth, controlled shift in consciousness that the module was supposed to induce, I felt a violent jolt, as if my mind was being ripped from my body. The world around me dissolved into a chaotic maelstrom of colors and sounds. I saw fragmented images, distorted visions of the station, of Neptune, of my childhood home, all swirling together in a nauseating vortex. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was adrift, lost in a sea of fragmented realities, my consciousness fractured, scattered across some unknown, unimaginable landscape. Then just as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided. I found myself standing in the engineering bay of Titan's Gate, but it was different. The once familiar space was now twisted, decaying. Panels hung open, wires dangled like dead veins, and the air was saturated with a putrid, iron-like odor. I was alone. The other crew members were gone. I tried to raise them on the comms, but there was only static. The station's AI was silent. I was cut off, isolated in this nightmarish, distorted version of reality. Cautiously, I began to explore my surroundings, my senses on high alert. Every step was an effort, every breath a struggle. The station seemed to be falling apart around me, groaning under some unseen strain. I found evidence of the breach, but it was different here, more extensive, as if the damage had been amplified, exaggerated by some unknown force. As I moved deeper into the station, I began to notice other anomalies. Objects were out of place, distorted, their shapes and functions altered in unsettling ways. The laws of physics seemed to be breaking down, twisted into something unpredictable. I felt a presence, a heavy emptiness that closed around me, probing my mind. It wasn't a physical sensation, but something more insidious. It felt like despair, like a crushing weight of hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm me. I realized, with a sickening certainty, that I was not alone in this fractured reality. Something else was here with me, something malevolent, and it was feeding on my fear. The chronostasis module hadn't saved us. It had delivered us into something far worse. It had ripped us from our reality and cast us into a nightmare from which there might be no escape. We were trapped, adrift in a fractured dimension, prey to an entity that existed beyond the boundaries of time and space. And I had a terrible feeling that our ordeal had only just begun. The descent into this fractured reality was an assault on my senses, a grotesque distortion of everything I knew. The entity, whatever it was, intensified its attacks, turning the already twisted environment into a personalized hellscape. One moment I was navigating the mangled corridors of Titan's Gate, the next I was hurtled into a nightmare version of Neptune's surface. The gravity here was a crushing force, beyond the already oppressive pull of the real Neptune. Each step was an agonizing effort as I fought to stay upright. The atmosphere was a churning vortex of toxic gases, a palette of greens and putrid yellows. I found a derelict mining drone, its chassis battered and torn, buried in the shifting, viscous ground. It offered a temporary reprieve from the crushing gravity. I collapsed inside, my body shaking from exertion and the sheer terror of this alien landscape. My survival here hinged on the meager resources of this broken machine, a fragile bubble of life in a sea of deadly forces. The entity, however, was not content with mere physical torment. It dug into my memories, distorting them into monstrous versions of my past. I was back on Earth, not in the familiar comfort of my childhood home, but in a macabre version of it. The house stood under a perpetual twilight, its walls deformed and swelling with a disgusting organic growth. Inside, every object, every piece of furniture was a twisted reflection of a memory, a physical manifestation of my deepest fears and regrets. The living room, once a place of warmth and laughter, was now a cavernous space filled with misshapen, lifelike forms that shifted and rearranged themselves, mimicking the shapes of people I once knew. I saw Ben, or rather a horrific spectral version of him. His face was a mask of accusation, his eyes burning with spectral fire. His form flickered, unstable, a visual echo of a lost life. "You killed me, Milo," he accused, his voice a rasping distortion, a sound that seemed to claw at my sanity. "You pushed too hard. You always push too hard." His hands, once steady and skilled, now ended in sharp, accusing claws that reached for me, a physical threat in this world of twisted memories. I recoiled, my back hitting the damp wall of the distorted living room. The entity fed on my guilt, amplifying it, turning it into a physical force that pressed against me, suffocating me. I had to fight back, not with weapons, but with the force of my will. I focused on the good memories, on the times Ben and I had shared before the accident, the camaraderie, the shared dreams. I clung to those memories, using them as a shield against the entity's manipulations. Slowly, I began to regain control. The distorted house started to recede, the spectral Ben fading back into the recesses of my mind. The entity, sensing my resistance, shifted its tactics. I began to hear the voices of the other crew members, faint and distorted, echoing through the fractured reality. They were trapped, each in their own personal nightmare, unaware of the others, isolated in their torment. I managed to establish a fragile, intermittent communication with Harding. His voice, strained and filled with terror, sputtered through my comm unit. He was trapped in a distorted version of the station's engineering bay, surrounded by malfunctioning machinery that threatened to crush him. He spoke of moving, hostile metal, of sparking wires that lashed out like living things, of consoles that displayed gibberish and spat fire. Harding had managed to jury-rig a signal booster, allowing us to communicate across the fractured dimensions. He gave me a crucial piece of information. The entity's power seemed to be linked to the chronostasis module. It was the anchor, the focal point of this fractured reality. A plan began to form in my mind. To escape, we had to sever our connection to this realm, and that meant destroying the chronostasis module. But the module's chamber was now a nexus of the entity's power, a heavily distorted and dangerous location within the fractured Titan's gate. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I had to reach the other crew members, help them break free from their individual nightmares. Their collective consciousness, I reasoned, was what anchored us to this dimension. Only by uniting our minds, by focusing our will, could we hope to sever the connection. The fractured reality pressed in, a suffocating weight on my sanity. But the fragmented connection with Harding, however tenuous, was a lifeline. It confirmed the horrifying truth. We were trapped, our consciousnesses ensnared by the entity that lurked within this twisted dimension. It had to be the chronostasis module. It was the anchor, the focal point of this nightmare. We had to destroy it. But I couldn't do it alone. I had to reach the others. Guided by Harding's broken transmissions, I navigated the distorted corridors of Titan's Gate. My first objective was Sullivan. Harding had described his nightmare, an endless loop of drone malfunctions, a constant cycle of crashing and burning in simulations of Neptune's atmosphere. I found him in a distorted recreation of the drone control room, strapped into a simulator chair, his body convulsing as he relived the simulated crashes over and over. His face was pale, slick with sweat, his eyes wide and unseeing. Years ago, I had installed a backdoor in the drone's operating system, a shortcut for diagnostics. I accessed a nearby console, fighting against the distorted code that resisted my every input. Finally, I managed to activate the backdoor, injecting a stream of countercode into the simulation. Sullivan's convulsions ceased. His eyes, though still unfocused, flashed with a glimmer of awareness. He was coming back. I pulled him from the simulator, his body limp and unresponsive. It took several minutes for him to regain full consciousness, his mind reeling from the simulated trauma. He looked at me, confusion and fear etched on his face. Together, we advanced, navigating the treacherous landscape of the fractured station. Our next objective was Dr. Baker. Harding's description of his plight was chilling. A rapidly mutating virus, consuming him from the inside out, a horrifying display of accelerated decay. We found him in what was once the medical bay, now a grotesque parody of a hospital ward. He was strapped to a medical bed, his body ravaged by the simulated disease. His skin was a patchwork of suppurating sores and tumorous growths, his flesh decaying at an accelerated rate. It was a horrifying spectacle of body horror, revealing the entity's power to manipulate not just the environment, but the very biology of its victims. Baker, even in his delirium, had managed to transmit fragments of medical data through our fragile comm link. It was a desperate attempt to find a cure, a way to combat the entity's biological weapon. Working together, using Baker's fragmented knowledge and our limited understanding of medical science, Sullivan and I synthesized an antidote from the station's remaining medical supplies. We administered the antidote, injecting it directly into Baker's ravaged body. The effect was immediate, but not instantaneous. The decay slowed, then stopped, the grotesque deformities receding, leaving behind scarred and damaged tissue. It took hours for Baker to stabilize, hours we spent huddled in the decaying medical bay, listening to the groaning of the station. Our final destination was the chronostasis module's chamber. Inside, we found Captain Bauer suspended within the device's core, his physical body seemingly unharmed, but his mind trapped in a nightmarish loop. He relived every command decision that had ever led to loss of life, each failure amplified and distorted by the entity. The chamber itself was a vortex of distorted space and time. The entity was here, its presence overwhelming, a suffocating weight that pressed against our minds. I knew what I had to do. I accessed the module's interface, initiating a counter-sequence, a program designed to project a positive narrative into Bauer's mind, to remind him of his successes, his acts of bravery, the lives he had saved. It was a battle of wills, a psychic tug-of-war against the entity's influence. Slowly, I began to see results. Bauer's tormented expression softened, his body relaxed. He was breaking free. Then a voice, familiar yet distorted, echoed through the chamber. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." It was Harding. He stood at the entrance of the chamber, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It wasn't our Harding. It was a puppet, a vessel controlled by the entity. "You cannot leave," he continued, the entity's chilling tone layered over Harding's familiar voice. "This is your new reality now." He charged at Sullivan, throwing him across the room. Baker, still weak from his ordeal, was easily overpowered. Bauer, newly awakened and disoriented, was no match for the entity's power. It was then I understood. We hadn't freed anyone. The rescues, the struggles, the moments of hope, it had all been an illusion, a sophisticated fabrication created by the entity. Harding had been compromised from the start, a Trojan horse leading us into a trap. The entity, through Harding, disabled the chronostasis module, severing our only hope of escape. The chamber, once a vortex of energy, fell silent, the distorted reality solidifying around us, trapping us within its confines. I was forced to watch as my crewmates, now fully under the entity's control, turned on me. Their eyes, once filled with fear and determination, now glowed with the same malevolent light as Harding's. I was alone. The entity closed in, its presence a crushing weight, suffocating me, extinguishing the last embers of hope. My struggles, my sacrifices, they had all been for nothing. The escape was a lie, a cruel, elaborate deception. My mind began to unravel, the fractured reality seeping into my very being. I was becoming a part of the labyrinth, another lost soul trapped within its endless corridors. There was no escape. There was only the entity and the endless nightmarish reality it had created. My existence was now a silent scream, proof of the futility of hope against an all-powerful cosmic horror. And the darkness, it was absolute. It was forever.